Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge. Today, we've got a short video introducing a new series for the channel. And as you may have guessed by the title of this video and what you see here on the tabletop in front of you, the project is going to involve the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War series by Multiman Publishing. Now, I usually try to do content for this channel for games that don't have a lot of good content available elsewhere. GCACW does have a lot of good content. For instance, Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials has a ton of great GCACW content. And if you are at all interested in GCACW and have not already checked out his channel, I highly recommend you do so. So why this series then? Well, first off, GCACW is one of my all-time favorite games. Now, I have not been playing it that long, but when I finally got around to checking out the series and getting into it, it instantly just skyrocketed towards the top of my all-time great games list. I just love how the system creates some of the best narrative of any war game I've encountered. And it does so using a really fairly simple set of rules and with a nice pace of play. So the question is, can I do content in a way that hasn't been seen before for GCACW? And I think I've come up with something. So this project will be a series of playthroughs of the campaign or advanced scenarios of each game in the series in chronological order in the style of my last Blitzkrieg and World in Flames playthroughs, with a heavy emphasis on that glorious narrative that GCACW provides. In fact, that narrative was the inspiration for the project's title, with apologies to Mr. Shelby Foote. So, how's it all going to work? Well, each campaign scenario will be a chapter in the narrative. And as those of you who are familiar with GCACW know, there are a lot of games in this series, and some of those advanced scenarios are quite long. So this will be a kind of a massive project. And because of that, it's going to be an intermittent project rather than sitting down and just working my way through the entire series all at once in a row, which, even though I absolutely adore this system, I would get burnt out on it long before reaching 1865. This is instead going to be an intermittent project where I'll do one chapter, and then, it might be a couple of weeks or maybe several months before I move on to the next chapter and so forth. And, it may well take longer than the actual war to complete this project, but we're going to press forward anyway. So this is something that you can look forward to seeing come out at irregular intervals over certainly the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, I would imagine. Now, several scenarios from the different games overlap in time. And I said I want to do this playthrough in chronological order. So how's that going to work? Well, I'm going to use the start date of each of the scenarios to determine the chronological order, with one exception. So let's run down which scenarios and the tentative order they will appear. We're going to be starting the project off with All Green Alike out of the Stonewall Jackson's Way 2 box, and specifically we'll be playing the Virginia campaign scenario, which runs July 15th to July 28th, 1861. This is the somewhat larger campaign that includes the activities in the valley off to the west, as well as the eastern portion of the campaign. Following that, we run into the first example of that overlap that I talked about before. We have Stonewall in the Valley on the left there, and On to Richmond 2 on the right. Now, the Shenandoah Valley campaign advanced scenario from Stonewall in the Valley runs from March 7th to June 19th, 1862, while the Peninsular campaign scenario from On to Richmond runs April 5th to July 25th. So you can see that there is a good just about 2.5 months, almost 3 months of overlap for these two campaigns. However, because the Shenandoah Valley campaign scenario begins March 7th, which is prior to April 5th, the second chapter will be the Shenandoah Valley campaign, followed by the Peninsular campaign. Now, I had toyed with the idea briefly of playing both of these scenarios simultaneously. So we would start on March 7th with the Shenandoah Valley campaign, and then when April 5th comes around, introduce the Peninsular campaign, and then just play both of them simultaneously moving forward from there, because in the Peninsular campaign, there's an abstract mechanism that allows Jackson's army from the valley to show up in the Peninsular campaign or head back to the valley, and the way they take losses is pretty simplified and abstract. And I thought, well, I've got the Shenandoah Valley campaign scenario. Instead of using the abstract mechanism in the Peninsular campaign, why don't you just play it out, and then we'll see exactly how strong Jackson's army is, what his losses are, what the consequences are of him moving his army to the Peninsular campaign, if that happens at all. But the more I looked into it, there were a couple issues. The first one, the biggest one, is table space. The Shenandoah Valley campaign is a 3-map scenario, and I'm pretty sure that on the Peninsular campaign is also a 3-map scenario. But in either event, even if the Peninsular campaign is only the 2 maps, it's been a while since I've played the scenario. In any event, I just don't have the table space to have them both set up at the same time. The World in Flames project is still on the really big table, which is what I would need to do these two simultaneously. And they're both rather long scenarios. So I think unless some kind of solution comes to me between now and when I start in on this, we'll probably do the Shenandoah Valley campaign in its entirety first, and then we'll move on to the Peninsular campaign. Although, having played the Shenandoah Valley campaign, there may be a way for me to use the outcome of that campaign rather than the rules as written mechanism in the Peninsular campaign to determine how many forces Jackson has at any given point in the Peninsular campaign scenario. We'll see. I'll take a look at that. So for now, we're going to plan on the Shenandoah Valley campaign followed by the Peninsular campaign. Following those two lengthy campaigns, we're going to go back to Stonewall Jackson's Way 2, and we're going to be playing from the Rapidan to Manassas, which runs August 19th to September 2nd, 1862. This is the second Bull Run campaign, and that leads directly into the Maryland campaign scenario from Here Come the Rebels, found in the Roads to Gettysburg 2 box, which begins on September 4th, just 2 days after the second Bull Run campaign ends. That's September 4th to September 20th to 22nd, 1862. Now, unfortunately, I do not have a copy of the Skirmisher #2 magazine, which had the Burnside Takes Command module in it, which includes scenarios for the Fredericksburg campaign and I think the Mud March as well. So we've got a big gap in time here from the end of the Maryland campaign in September 1862 until we get to Thunder on the Mississippi and the Vicksburg campaign scenario, which begins April 30th and runs to July 8th, 1863. Now, this overlaps with a couple other scenarios. It's, again, a lengthy one, as you can see, running from the end of April through early July, but it does predate the Chancellorsville campaign as well as the Gettysburg campaign scenario. So we're going to start with Vicksburg. We're going to run through Vicksburg, even though it wraps up really about the same time as the Gettysburg campaign. So we'll see Thunder on the Mississippi, the Vicksburg campaign, coming up after the Antietam campaign in 1862. Now, once we finish with the lengthy Vicksburg campaign scenario, we'll be turning to Stonewall's Last Battle and playing the Chancellorsville campaign from May 1863, and then that's going to lead into the Gettysburg campaign out of Roads to Gettysburg 2, which runs June 22nd to July 9th, 1863. Following the Gettysburg campaign, we're going to be turning to Battle Above the Clouds. There will be 2 campaign scenarios that I'll be playing out of this particular game. The first one is the Chickamauga campaign, which runs August 29th to September 29th, 1863. After that, we are going to jump over to the deep game scenario out of Skirmisher number 4. This is part of Lee's Last Offensive module that was included in that magazine issue. That runs October 11th to 24th, 1863. And then we come right back to Battle Above the Clouds with the Siege of Chattanooga, October 28th to December 26th, 1863, before we hop back east to Skirmisher number 4, the Mine Run campaign, which runs November 24th to December 2nd, 1863. Following the Mine Run campaign, we are going back to the On to Richmond 2 box with Grant Takes Command, specifically Grant's 1864 offensive scenario, which runs May 4th to June 12th, 1864. Then you see on the right, we have Atlanta is Ours. We're going to be playing the Atlanta campaign scenario, which runs May 10th to September 18th, 1864. And you can see both of these scenarios have heavy overlap as well. However, they are much less linked than the Shenandoah Valley campaign and Peninsular campaign scenarios that I talked about earlier. So in this instance, we're definitely going to be playing the Grant's 1864 offensive in its entirety before we head out west and do the Atlanta campaign scenario. Now, after the Atlanta campaign, we're going to hop back east with Roads to Gettysburg 2 and play the Early's Raid scenario, which runs July 1st through July 20th, 1864, before finishing up Atlanta is Ours with the Without Home and Habitation scenario, which is September 29th to October 20th, 1864. Now, following right on the heels of Without Home and Habitation, we are going to play Hood Strikes North. That runs November 23rd to December 24th, 1864. And then we come to the one exception to the chronological order that we're going to be doing the series in, and that is out of the On to Richmond 2 box. It is the Petersburg campaign scenario. This scenario, it is the longest scenario by far of any of the scenarios in the series to date. It runs from June 15th, 1864 to April 6th, 1865. And you can see, using the start date, this scenario probably should have been played right after the Atlanta campaign. However, for a couple of reasons, I've decided to move it down to the end of the queue for the series. First of all, it is, like I said, the longest scenario. I think it's 217 turns, something around there. It also is the campaign that takes us all the way through the end of the war historically in April of 1865. So I thought it fitting that we end the project with the campaign that ended the war. So we're going to be saving the Petersburg campaign for the very last chapter in the project. Now, the reason I've said the order I've just given you is tentative is that MMP will be publishing more games in the GCACW series. For example, Stonewall in the Valley 2, I know, is in works. And that game is going to include not just a new edition of Stonewall's 1862 Shenandoah Valley campaign, but it's also going to include Sheridan's 1864 campaign. So if that game is released prior to this series reaching the summer of 1864, and I have every reason to expect it probably will be, I will be picking up Stonewall in the Valley 2 for sure. Any GCACW product is basically an automatic buy for me at this point. I will incorporate the campaign scenario for Sheridan's campaign in the summer of 1864, and we'll see where we slot that in. Probably somewhere around Grant Takes Command, the Grant's 1864 offensive, either before or after that, perhaps maybe even the Atlanta campaign. We'll see. The other reason is that if I can somehow get a copy of Skirmisher number 2, preferably unpunched and in good condition, I will absolutely do scenarios from the Burnside Takes Command module in that issue of the magazine. And that'll be nice because it will fill in that rather large gap from September 1862 to April 1863 that currently exists. So hopefully you're looking forward to this project as much as I am, but that's going to do it for today. Thanks for watching. Take care, and we'll see you next time.